Hello, everybody. I'm Cale Lopp. This is another episode of Constructive Criticism. This is actually episode 10. I had to count all my fingers and toes for this one. So we are here with my host, Zach. Welcome. And
What's going on?
Chris McCray with Cross Timbers Consulting and a lot of other things that you've done in your background is with us today. And we're going to talk a little bit about tribal public safety, consulting, construction, and sovereignty, smarter project planning, all of those little details that come along with how we get things done and how the tribal nations may differ a little bit in how those processes need to happen, how we get good projects built. So thanks for joining us. And is there anything you'd like to say up front?
Well, I do appreciate you guys, having me on. I've known you guys for a little bit. We've done some projects together. So currently I'm with Cross Timbers Consulting. Typically work with tribal nations and do tribal transportation projects. But formerly, where you guys know me from, I was with the Pawnee Nation for about 14 years, the transportation manager and the planning and development director, and then also. You alluded to, I've been a firefighter EMT for Pawnee Nation and City of Pawnee for about 23 years this May. So
it's always fire and construction just always goes so well together,
right?
Man, Chris, I think we've had a lot of discussions, both project and fire and all this other stuff, but I don't think that I've ever really gotten like your background, kind of the Chris origin story. Like, how did you even get into what you're doing today? Like, where did that come from?
As in firefighting or as in construction?
Let's go both. Yeah.
All right, let's go both. So me as a firefighter, a first responder, my grandpa was actually in the 70s. He was the fire chief for the city of Pawnee. And then right after him, my great uncle was the fire chief. So it was kind of, like a family tradition type thing. So when I was going to college at Oklahoma State, I had part-time working with the city of Pawnee. And so I joined the fire department. And then as I was going to college, the mayor at the time asked me if I would run for street commissioner. So street commissioner is kind of like county commissioner, but at the city level. So I did that and I won. And so I was with the city of Pawnee for about 11 years and serving as street commissioner. And then from there, I had an opportunity to go to the Pawnee Nation and basically start the same thing and eventually started running their transportation program. So that's kind of the origin stories for both. And again, I'm a Pawnee Nation tribal citizen as well. So it was great working for my tribe and getting to see the concepts, in the beginning of projects and then doing those to fruition and actually seeing those and how it actually made the area look and feel, and everybody took pride in, what we built. So it was great.
Sure. Did you have any construction background prior to the city?
Not really. I had, some working, off and on, just, as a high school kid, working during the summers, doing some small construction stuff, but nothing to that extent.
Fair enough.
Wow.
I mean, I never would have known.
Right. No, that just reinforces some of the conversations we've had on this podcast about the fact that anybody, there's so many different backgrounds that come into construction and develop into construction. And 90% of it is built off of something that you said just there, I feel like, which is people wanting to make either their town, their community, their city, their state better or serve in some way. It's like, we need these things. We need, roads, we need water, we need sewer, we need these things. So I'm going to start figuring out how to do those for my community, or I'm going to press into that. So from there, you had that experience, and then what I'm going to follow on to Zach's conversation, and what has kept you engaged? Because you've stayed in that now for a while.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, it's the passion. So, moving from Pawnee Nation to where I am now, I have a broader range of working with different tribal entities, and and knowing the ins and outs of the tribal transportation program. I've met a lot of these people along the way, and another part of my background, in doing tribal work, I served on a couple of national committees. So I was the president of the Intertribal Transportation Association, and then I was also the chairman of the Tribal Transportation Program Coordinating Committee. So I sat at these tables. I had conversations with
Yeah.
different tribes across the country, and and also sat in DC and worked on different policies and regulations that had to do with this program. And then from there, I also sat on a couple of state committees. I was on the Oklahoma Tribal Transportation Council as the vice president, and then on the Oklahoma Tribal Advisory Board, I sat on as well. So again, getting to see all these people, and they're my peers. They're Some of them were at different levels. Some of them had more time than me. Some of them, have less time than me. But at the end of the day, it's seeing all these different projects, all these issues. Some are similar, some are different, for each tribe, but helping and seeing them come to fruition and what it does to the communities is what I just love.
That must have been a crazy learning curve going in at the city.
Oh yeah, yeah. Going from the city to tribal governments, I mean, there's some similarities, but I read a lot of the federal regulations, and I got to know those very well.
That's
When
crazy.
you take that and you look at what you've done and the things that you've built or been a part of building in your career, what are some of the key, like if you could look back at yourself and talk to yourself, your younger self, what are some of the things you would say, "Hey, think about this, ask this question, push on this." What are some of the things that you would say, "Hey, this is something that I want to see us do better or know better if I were going to be in the position that you've been in?"
I mean, that's hard to say. I feel the level where I started out, I dove in, head first, and I think you guys, from our conversations, previously, I'm not afraid of innovation. I'm not afraid of trying something new. Going back, and if I would told myself, I would tell myself the same thing. New is scary, but new can be great. And learning different ways to do things. I really, like I said, I studied hard on what the regulations were, what I could and can do. And at the end of the day, I pushed the envelope on things. And being at that national level, different questions come in from across, Alaska, the lower 48, and everything on how things can be done. And listening to how things are done in North Dakota versus Oklahoma are
Mm,
totally different. I mean, it's all within the same regulation, same building specs, and well, not building specs, but same concepts and everything. But things are a little bit different up there than they are down here, and then vice versa. Also up in Alaska, things are done totally different, so,
mhm.
but done within the same regulations. So it's been interesting. It's been a fun journey to go from, like I said, from the local government into the tribal government, and again, I've always been uh, on the innovative side of things, and trying to push that envelope and do the best we can with the money that we have.
Yeah.
How much
Well,
is
and
your
go
sorry,
ahead,
go
Zach.
ahead. Okay. How much has your process changed? So, going from the city level in how you approach projects to where you sit today, like what has influenced your view on how you approach projects?
Yeah, definitely, it's greatly changed. So going from the local level, there's not really planning per se. I mean, there's some like, oh yeah, I want to try to do this next year.
Right.
I only have a couple $100,000 maybe to do that. So I got to think, okay, I can only spend this much. Going into the tribal level, where you actually have to develop a tribal transportation improvement plan, a 5-year plan, and you got to show where that money is going to go per each project. And then you also going to have a long range transportation plan. So it puts into perspective and the long range and thoughts and ideas, not only as myself as the manager or director of the program, but I have to get the input of the public. I got to get the input of the tribal council, and then take all that and compile it into what would be our next 5 to 20 years. So it's a totally different process.
I've read the consolidated 5-year plan for Pawnee, and it is hefty.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
the level of planning, and then I think from your background in public safety with the fire side of it, you're probably you can't help but think about how this infrastructure impacts response times, impacts all of these things. Does that come into? I mean, I'm assuming you're thinking about all of those aspects when you're serving that community. That's so much.
It is, but I think that type of background, it definitely makes you think outside the box a little bit more.
Mm,
Whereas, somebody who's just an engineer or just in construction, your focus is right here, of how to get to the plan and how to get it done. But on the planning side of things, having that other foresight of, emergency response, first responders, going here and there definitely has helped in that planning aspect. Just to give an example on planning and this type of thing, when you put down a plan, it's only as good as what the money and the infrastructure is at the time. And then all of a sudden, you get a new infrastructure bill, and all of a sudden, oh, hey, there's $1 billion for bridges. So, oh, I got to rethink my plan. So I got to redo this. And so along with that, here at Pawnee, some of that thinking came in a roundabout way that, you know, building these bridges and everything with helping with the counties, helping with our infrastructure and local government. We have an issue with a railroad that dissects the town and the nation in
mhm.
half. There's no emergency response on the other side. So why can't we build a bridge over the railroad track? So some of that planning has been in place, and Pawnee Nation is moving forward with those thoughts and ideas of building that overpass over the railroad track, just for the fact about emergency response to the other side. So
Yeah. I
absolutely.
definitely share the sentiment in that direction. Also having, a fire and EMS background, you being a part of the emergent response for the 2014 tornado that hit the city of Moore Public School, where
Mhm.
unfortunately there's a lot of children that were injured and ultimately passed away. I will refuse to build a child care facility or educational facility without a storm shelter or at least a hardened space. And so, I am looking at that from day one in how do we, like, yeah, I know that you want this really, really nice tile, but let's figure out how we save enough money in this project to build a concrete vault in the bathrooms or, whatever. Like, let's make sure that these children are safe, and that's just, would I have looked at a project that way had I not had that personal experience? Maybe. Obviously, being a father now, I don't want my child somewhere that doesn't have some sort of a safe space. But, prior to that, I don't know that I would have had that same burning resolution to make sure that that was an absolute necessary part of a project. Had I not experienced that on the emergency response side. So I definitely share that sentiment. And I think there's a lot of people in the construction industry tied to emergency response or have a
Mhm.
background or at least connected to it in some way. For whatever reason, those two lanes of industry always seem to have an intermeshing of the type of people that are in it. And so, I think you see that a lot, but it's definitely not something that's talked about very much in those personal experiences and how that's put together. Kale, I don't know, like on the architecture side, I mean, I know that you have a somewhat of an emergency response background, but um, how do you see that going into design development?
I mean, and Chris, you can speak to this too. I think because you've been on the planning side of it and the management side of it. But for me, somewhere back, like you're talking about, Zach, somewhere back in my time before being a father, before marriage, architecture was about sexy buildings.
Mm-hmm.
And it was
Yep.
always about sexy buildings. And then there was this transition in me, and I think it wasn't from any kind of, I mean, I think your story is beautiful, and in one sense, I don't know that I have something that was that impactful from an emergency response type of thing, but for me, it became about, if I as I started to interact with buildings and enjoy buildings, I want that building to serve well. And it drives me nuts. I'm sure, Chris, you can speak to this too. It drives me nuts when things aren't effective. Like, it's like I'm sitting at my desk and I can't reach a pen. Why can't I reach a pen? It down to that little level of detail of function. And so then it's when you start to dig into that, I mean, we're doing residential projects right now that I'm pushing for safe rooms in, because I'm like, guys, we live in Oklahoma. Let's just get real about this. You're going to have storms. We're going to have tornadoes. We're going to have those kinds of events. How are we responding to those? Building a brand new house in Oklahoma today as cost effectively as we can do underground or hardened space in a home. Let's figure that out. And if you can't, how do we get you to a place where you can find a grant, or there's funding for those in other areas? So let's get people safe. So it becomes about function for me. What kind of leading into that and pulling you back in, Chris? Uh, what do you see in that when you start looking at architecture, particularly? Because I know your background's design, or your background's construction, and you've been managing and planning construction. But I mean, having worked with you on the design side, I have to say I was impressed and excited to get the opportunity to work with you on those projects, because you did have that innovative attitude. You're kind of like, well, show me what we can do.
Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So,
So unpack that a little more for me.
all right. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm not afraid of any innovation and any thought. You know, I welcome, the way we did our projects. I welcome all the conversation to fix. I'm not going to call it a problem, maybe an issue or something that arises. I'm big in that risk management. At the very beginning,
Hmm.
I might see a risk on it. Zach will see a different type of risk. And Kelly, you'll see a different type of risk. Uh, but if we put all three of our heads together, we're going to figure out the best way to mitigate those risks. And it might be a combination of all three of us, or Zach might have the best idea. Who knows at that particular time? But three heads are definitely better than one when it comes to looking at an issue. But I definitely, when we go into a building, constructing a building, I definitely
Yeah.
look at it too, on the fire side. I look at it not necessarily in the construction, how it's what the construction is. I'm looking at how I can tear this up if I need to get access, like to the attic or something, so I can
Right.
ventilate it, to do this. I look at those type of things when I'm looking at the fire side. How can I get to the wall to escape, or vice versa, or there's windows for people to get out. On the EMS side, I'm looking at, is the hallway wide enough, or the doorways wide enough so I can get a stretcher in. So I mean, though, I've been in situations, and I'm sure you guys have seen this too, where things are too narrow and you can't get in to get a patient, that you got to take a backboard in, and even then it's hard to get them strapped and then carried out to where you need to be. So those types of things, definitely, when it comes into a new design, and it's easy to plan for those things. But on some of the things that we did, doing a reconstruction of a early 1900s building,
Yeah.
we had to redesign it, and take some of those things into effect when we're doing that reconstruction.
Sitting in the chair that you do today, how do you balance that with essentially feasibility, or a conducive space for function, ease of access, reducing fire load, easy vents, easy access? Because sometimes in some projects, those aspects that would improve those categories of items that you look at do take away from the feel of the project, the way that it looks. And how do you approach concept concept to at least, initial design documents in balancing those two aspects.
Yeah, I think it's having, that personal relationship of whatever tribe and, person who's in charge, dealing with to let them know, hey, this is a good idea, or, or no, if we did this, this would make it things better. But I think for me, and definitely for a lot of tribes, it's knowing the person who you're talking to is giving you good advice, on what things, how things should be and how things, need to be done. But even then, at the end of the day, you're working for, a sovereign nation who can make their own determination on things. And sometimes, you know, things get tweaked just a little bit, from that discussion. And at the end of the day, it's a great product that you do, and the tribes have the determination to make if they are sold on one way to do it. But being able to give that advice and just have that personal ability with who you're working with, I think makes things a lot better.
How do you see what are some of the misconceptions? Like, you're talking about design, you're talking about planning, you're talking about thought process on building a building. What are some of the things that you've seen, misunderstandings or misconceptions that architects or contractors are bringing to the table, particularly when they're working with tribal governments? But in general, if you have other examples, fine. But what are those things where you feel like you see a lot of people walk in the door and you're like, they always think this, and that's not really true?
So I'll go back to the way I'll go back to like bid build
Yeah.
type construction. So in that scenario, I have seen where, I'm going to talk about architecture for a second, in a bad way. So
No, we're good. This is where we always go.
in my experience, bringing in architecture first, and you hear, the tribe, you think, all right, tribe's got money, to do these projects. Right off the bat, I feel like they're trying to build the Taj Mahal, right? I mean, and the tribe says, oh yeah, I want X, Y, and Z. And that's basically all you get. And so they design something, and it's the Taj Mahal. And then, when you come back with, 30, 60% plans, and you got to start taking stuff away because, the
Right.
cost estimates are out the roof. And then you have the tribe will have that feeling like, man, is this really what, I want? This is only I can afford type thing. Doing it that way, there's that angst in between, the owner
Mm,
and the architect that builds up. But I think the way that we have done stuff together in the past, where we bring both the architect and the architect and the construction management in together, you talk about those issues right off at the beginning, and you don't have that feeling. So the owner gets to talk about what they want. The contractor gets to tell how, yeah, we can build something like that, and the architect designer can actually design it close to the
mhm.
conception on the first time around. So you don't have that battle going back and forth. Of building Taj Mahal, but really what I want is, you know, something a third of the price that
Right.
looks
Mhm.
just as, fancy too. So
Well, I think that issue, it's still, I mean, it's still absolutely relevant. You see it every day. I've got firsthand knowledge. There's a private school being built or at least being planned in Norman. A local larger firm was retained for that, and they bought, I think it's 26 acres. They want some master planning, and they want initial concept drawings for 6 metal buildings. Well, they got 6 buildings that were, post and beam masonry. I mean, just, they're thinking, you know, $2-3 million a building, and now we're
You're
looking
at
at,
10.
initial concept of, yeah, 8 to 10 a building.
Yeah.
And I think, especially, Kale and I see this quite a bit, which, and I'm sure you do as well, in the consulting side, because everyone has a different level of knowledge of how to proceed into these types of projects. And You may have one that has done a lot of projects and they're really experienced. Yeah, I know how this goes. Okay, yep, looks good to me. We're on the same page. And unfortunately, like the school, they have no clue. They have absolutely no concept of what they need to be asking for, what they need to be demanding, what they need to be presenting to protect their funds. You're
Yeah,
not
their
trying to
investment.
expend just tons of money for a concept that you can't use in pre-construction. So it's definitely relevant. How do you engage with your clients in navigating that early process, in convincing them that there is better ways other than traditional design build?
Yeah, so I've had these conversations, and for me, I can go back to my past and show the projects that I've done, and how they can be relative, to the projects they're trying to get done, and um, where we've, as where I was as an owner, but a very, you know engaged and knowledgeable owner, we could change things, on the fly if we need to. To give an example, like the new construction that we did, at one point it was red iron steel, and we went to metal stud construction after that. I
Yeah.
mean,
Mhm.
just but being that, having that knowledgeable, seeing those estimates and knowing what it was, that was a pretty quick move to doing that. Going to someone who doesn't have that level of expertise and the insight, again, I lean on my experiences and the stuff that I have done to show that what can be done with the money that they have to get the project from conception to close out. And
Yeah.
I've had a really good track record in doing those things. So
What was the first thing? I mean, you've done design bid build, you've done traditional delivery methods, but what we've done with you and what you've done forward has not you've not leaned as much in it. What was the first shift for you? And then how did you develop that thought process of like there's got to be a better way? And then how did you go find that?
yeah, so we had just completed a project, and it was a long, painstaking, process. It was, I want to say it was probably close to 3 years from hiring the engineer to the completion of the project. And I was like, this just takes way too long to have tribal council asking you, when's this going to get done? When's it going to get done? And then it seems like every time you have a bid build, there's always an overrun. You got to do some kind
Mhm.
of modification, and that, again, that comes into with, the length of time. Cost of things go up. So I reached out to Federal Highways at the time, and I was like, "Tell me something, about, you know uh, design build." And they came back with, well, there's a new concept called Construction Manager General Contractor, CMGC,
Right.
and asked if I would be interested in getting some more information on that. So they actually sent somebody to the tribe. We did a little training over it. And, as we talked about the speed of getting things done, reduction of costs, it just clicked. The whole concept was new. The whole concept was definitely scary at doing, because at the time we were the second tribe. No, I'm sorry, the third tribe to even attempt this. And so as we discussed it internally and came up with the projects, we came up with 13 projects, about $6.1 million. Getting all these projects together came out to be that we were going to do vertical and horizontal construction. So when we actually went into construction and design for all these, we were the first ones that we know of to do vertical and horizontal
Right.
construction all at the same time with the same contractor, with the same designer.
Wow.
So it was definitely unique. And again, being a very engaged, owner, and, and with the knowledge that, I had, and with, the people, there at the nation, sitting down at the table, having these intimate discussions with the designer, with the contractor, it just worked. It worked for me. At the end of the day, does that work for everybody? Probably not. But at the time, it was something new. It was innovative, and we was able to do those 13 projects $6.1 million. We came in under budget, and we did it all in 18 months.
Right.
That's
So, I
awesome.
mean, it was, and we had 4 different funding sources too. That was another thing too,
Wow.
because when doing that, it's easy to conceive doing something with one funding source, but we had 4 different funding sources, and there was 2 different federally funded sources that we had
Yeah.
to get it done too.
Wow.
So it was great. And
That's
then
one of the
so
questions. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and so from that, learning the ins and outs, and then putting out the projects that we did with you guys, learning the things I liked, learning things I didn't necessarily like. We went into a hybrid. I call it a hybrid design build that
Hmm.
we did with you guys. Meshed that kind of together.
Yeah, that was you kinda putting the chef's hat on a
Yeah.
little bit and going, "Okay, this I want a little bit of this, and I want a little bit of this, and this is
Absolutely.
what I wanna put out there." And, what's beautiful is that, I still reference that project with you as an example of what I think progressive delivery methods can be.
Hmm.
And, that was a huge, inspiration to me and those projects just because I was like, "This is an owner that's engaged. It's an owner that cares, that's actually dictating new methods that are hybrids of 2 very progressive methods that are out there currently to get something." And it takes that unique knowledge of the situation that you're in, of the nation that you're working with, the tribal government you're working with, and the funding sources that you're coming, and you add all of that background and knowledge to be able to go, "Okay, I want these pieces of CMGC. I want these pieces of design build,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna put this together, and I want you guys to run it like this, and then ask me questions if you don't know what I want you to do," you know? And it worked really well, and it was a
It did.
very collaborative and process, and the product that you got, I hope I'm speaking this openly, like, the
Hmm.
product that you got, I think, was a better product that I've seen a lot of programs put out for a better price, and the timeline was aggressive. Like we moved fast, and it felt really good. So, that's what I was gonna that was one of the things I was gonna ask is, like, one of the things that I've seen, and I would love for you to speak to this, is, like, from funding sources and navigating the multiple different types of funding sources when you're dealing with sovereign nations, tribal nations, that can really be an impact on your timelines. It can be an impact on your production quality. How do you navigate that? Like, as a consultant and as a manager in both those chairs that you've sat in, how do you manage that?
It is definitely talking early with the funding source
Mm.
on the concept and idea. So when we did CMGC, this was a federal highway idea, so they were all on board. When it came to the other funding source, which was HUD ICBG, we basically had to talk them into this process, and there was definitely some reluctancy because they've never heard it before. So we had to get them on board with that process. So and at the end of the day, it worked. All the reporting, all the tracking of the funding was on par. So it worked out really good. So I knew at that point that it would work across the board with different funding sources. But you had to reach out to them and just kind of let them know what was going on. So when we got to our project that we did before I wrote the RFP and all that, I talked to Indian Health Services. I told them, all right, I'm going to do this a little bit different, and so described how I wanted to do that and have the meetings and how things were going to go and how they were going to be involved and everything, and they liked the concept. So ultimately we rolled with it. And you've seen how when we had our weekly progress meetings, how everybody got a chance to talk and had input and how things went.
Yeah.
It was good. It was a
That
fun
was a
one.
good that was a cool project. Yeah, I mean, it was eye opening for, Kale and I of, we'd had a lot of discussions of, which, I mean, you can go to, any pretty much any construction institution and they're talking about integrated project delivery and, all of these other things. And which are all well and good, but a lot of them seem very rigid for most projects. I mean, yeah, you can throw that on a $100 million program, and sure, yeah, you're going to probably save 10 million. But how does that apply to smaller programs and your average middle section of all your jobs? Somewhere between 1 and 10 million is probably 75% or more of most of your projects, especially in middle America. So it was definitely really eye opening for Kale and I to go through that process, which you know the stars aligned for us to be working with you in that program, and then work in another CMGC program with, I believe, the guys that originally consulted you. And so we got the benefit of seeing okay,
Yeah.
this is the cut and dry version of what really the nuts and bolts that work out of this, as well as the textbook version, over here.
Mhm.
And so it really cemented that for us. And, that's another big reason that Kale and I are really doing this podcast of, hey, there are better ways. There are better methods. There's more efficient methodologies that can be applied to both construction and architecture. But those conversations have to be started somewhere. It has to be put out there on Front Street. I do, before we move on, I do want to congratulate you because I do believe that was the first CMGC project, like you said, to combine horizontal and vertical, but it was also the first CMGC project in Oklahoma, correct?
Yes, it was the first in Oklahoma as well. Yes.
Yeah. But now there's been, since your development, which the other tribal nation that it was kind of watching and learning you carve that path for Oklahoma has been, what are we up to now? 14 additional
Mhm.
projects that have
Yeah.
been delivered out of 3 different programs because
Yeah.
of your innovation and
Yeah.
bringing that to Oklahoma. So I
Awesome.
just want to say thank you on that because that's pretty
Thank you.
awesome.
At the end of the day, innovation begets innovation. So,
Um,
the first part, of innovation, with the CMGC was just, the process itself.
Hmm.
But as we got into doing different things, on one of the projects, we needed to build a small pedestrian bridge. And so out of that, we got with the fast cast bridges, and we were the second ones to ever do this fast cast bridge, which we built this bridge, basically in one day. We had prep one day, constructed it one day, and put it back together, everything in the third day, and had it open. It's an innovation, and you're starting to see it a lot more in Oklahoma doing these types of bridges. But we were the second ones in Oklahoma to do that and put that in this project. So that was just another like innovation that came out of this innovation, and so when people are thinking outside the box, who knows what can come about and what can be done with that. So when creativity is allowed
yeah.
and in the process, great things can come out of it.
I
Absolutely.
think
Well,
it's Go ahead,
I was
Zach.
going to say, just in the DOT side of things, and the road and highway and bridge for Oklahoma, Fastcast has very quickly after that become a very common thing. Like there's manufacturing connections now. I believe there's 2 or 3 different dedicated you know
Mhm.
manufacturers that are pushing for the Oklahoma market. Some of the largest civil contractors in Oklahoma are now using that as the basis of design and, their, base bid for a lot of the highway and turnpike stuff. So, again, it's interesting to see, even out of, what would be considered rural Oklahoma, how much that impact is changing just the entire landscape of construction in the entire state off of the success of one program. I don't know. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. I think I would say I wanna tag on to that and kind of pull some more out of you, Chris, because I think in my experience, and my experience is not holistic in the sense that I can't say that I've touched every CMGC project or that I've touched every tribal nation, but some of the most innovative things that we're seeing in design and construction right now are coming out of tribal nations because they're having to navigate funding, like you're talking about with all the different funding sources, but they're also having to navigate how we get these things done quickly because costs continue to go up. Things are happening faster, and they're trying to bring national level, projects to what are predominantly rural areas. And we're seeing a lot of innovation out of our tribal nations. And I don't know if that gets talked about enough. Would you share a little bit of what you've seen in your career and your path? Because to me, the tribal nations are innovating Oklahoma, at least in design and construction.
Hmm.
No, I think you're 100% correct. Where local governments and the state governments and county governments, they're stuck in this is the way we've always done it. Now, the state is a little bit more innovative on trying things, but they have the funding to be able to do that. I feel like that's where their thought process comes in. But for a tribe, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's limited funding on some things, but then there's the other aspect of it is how do we get this done fast? How do we get this out there for our people to use? And so there's more of a passion and a heart to get this done for the community. And I'm not saying that's not for those other, but it's more it's a deeper connection for the tribes and the purpose of why we're doing construction in the first place. It is to help our people. And so when that is involved, you f- you figure out ways to help your family, right? And so then that's what this is all about is how quickly and the best way I can help my family.
Well, I mean, any savings that are generated, by the method are in turn intended to go to another project. So, then it's almost like you get a bonus project to that. But which, and we've said it before, and I think you and I have even had this conversation of, it's sure it's great to build stores and Starbucks and whatever, but there is something inherently different about the immediate return on investment that tribes and nations, their projects have on that community. Um, you know, I think we saw that in Pawnee. We've seen it in several other tribes and nations in the Oklahoma area, and I'm sure that's a similar sentiment for most tribes. Just like you said, it's a community focus rather than anything else that ultimately is driving that desire to be better in as many aspects as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, when you go and meet with the tribes and everything, one of the first things is it's about the relationship. And when you have somebody who has a lot of passion too for what they're trying to do, that impact hits hard with me at least. And I want to see this product done. I want to see it constructed. I want to see it used too for what the tribe wanted to see. And it's great to see at the end of the day the uses for these roads, for these bridges, for these buildings that the community gets to use from the youth up to the elders who are benefiting from these construction projects.
Yeah.
You said relationship, and it made me think of we were just talking about it last week with Iowa Tribe Chairman Jake Keys. The the gifts that were offered by our team when we came up to Pawnee for the interview, just which that was again, we are not tribal. We didn't have that background. We didn't have that on our resumes, but ultimately, I think we more than anything, looking back, we pushed a commitment to the culture. We pushed a reverence for, the culture and the heritage itself, and then a commitment to the project. Because, I mean, quite frankly, you were there. We didn't have much else to offer at the time on face value, but, a desire to try to do something better and something that would generate true benefit to the nation itself. That was one of the scariest things that I've done in an interview, but ultimately, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I think at least on our side, I'd like to get your perspective because it was something that we did talk about with Chairman Keys as well. Is new contractors coming into tribes and nations, or whether that be architects, consultants, contractors, what have you, that it really comes down to that commitment base, that, you know, how engaged are you? How willing are you to truly build a relationship here? Can you show me that you are willing to give it 110% to this
Uh-huh.
project because of the what's at stake on the other side? If this project screws up, then my community, my people don't get the benefit, or another project is impacted because this is screwed up. Can you speak to a little bit of just the importance of those aspects in engaging with tribal nations, and what you're kind of looking at there, when both as an owner and as a consultant, in kind of that selection basis? Because I think that in some cases, I think it's overplayed, I guess, in some ways, that you can go too far in that pursuit. But like, what's the things that you're looking for there?
All right, so I'll make mention to, when you guys, came and stuff, and that presentation of what you guys did, that was great. But you got to take that with a grain of salt too, because there's lots of people who want to do business with tribes.
Yeah.
I mean, so you gotta take it. I fear the Greeks even when they bring gifts. At the end of the, at the action speaks words. So as you get into the projects with as a consultant or as an owner, or with you guys, I go back to this. I've said it several times. It's the relationship, and you can tell when somebody's bought into the process, and you can tell when somebody's not. Again, you see that more when an issue or a risk has come up, and how that's navigated. If the contractor and architect are not engaged and everything, the owner will feel left out, that I have nobody protecting me. That's what these guys should have done. There was an instance with us, that an issue came up with a concrete floor, and how to work all that out. It was a process, but we were together trying to figure out and solve the solution, where we ultimately came up with a great solution and worked that out. That right there, to me, action spoke words, that you were engaged. We were trying to figure out the process. And, at the end of the day, me as the main contact with you guys, I think that level of trust and how we were going to continue the other projects, that level of trust went up. And I go back to that, actions speak words. If the consultant, if the contractor, architect is engaged with the owner's going to feel that and know that you guys have that passion for what you're trying to do, and work with the owner for these projects.
It it's so true because it's when you meet with any tribal nation, I feel like there's that history and that cultural there's storytelling in a way that if you've never experienced it, and I don't wanna speak for you, but that's what I've experienced. It's like they're always telling me stories about my grandma, my grandpa, my this person, that person within the community. And I think there's to your point, Chris, there has to be an attitude of commitment to that community. You have to understand that when they're talking about that project, they're talking about what it's gonna do for the generations, their kids, their grandkids, their grandkids' kids, because they think of it back up the line that same way. My grandma, my grandpa, my great grandpa that were here and did this and taught me that. And I think there's an element of that we can lose in just traditional, like, got the project, draw a project, build a project, let's go, and it's been a really beautiful experience to work with the tribal nations, and like I said, I have a great deal of respect because I see them as innovators in our state. I see them as grounding the construction and design industry in so many ways because they're saying, "Hey, hey, wait, wait, wait. This has to mean something. It's bigger than just I don't need just a cool glass box. It's gotta work, and it's gotta do something for my community." And, that's a really beautiful legacy to be a part of. How do you see that going forward? now that you're in consulting, you've touched on civic duty, you've touched on managing projects from a position in a tribal nation. Now you're consulting. But what do you see that legacy as you look forward, 5 or 10 years out? What are you seeing for the tribal nations of Oklahoma in construction and design going forward?
At the end of the day, I only see it getting better. I see as we continue to innovate, as we continue to do projects within tribal nations, I'm seeing it now. Even more tribes are like taking notice of how other tribes are doing things and taking risks outside their norm of doing business with. And I'll say it like this, the BIA is very rigid and how they work with tribes, but you're seeing the self-determination, the self-governance of tribes a lot more. And so they're breaking out of that government box that they've been held in. And
Mhm.
so, they're eager to do things. And you're seeing that as funding is coming more and more available with different projects. This last round of infrastructure funding, there has been a lot of it. And I think you're seeing a lot of the tribes doing bigger and better things with this funding. And a lot of it is because they're breaking out of that box of this being held by this federal governments, that they're doing their own self-determination and doing things, and innovating as they do it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Man, I know we're kind of getting close on time here. Before we start to kind of wind down, I do you want to highlight you and both Cross Timbers Consulting. I was doing just a little bit of research. Looks like project planning, civil engineering, technical project assistance, GIS, environmental services. Man, you guys have a wide range of things that you offer. What is something that speaking to potential clients and other tribes and nations, what's something that you would like them to know about you or working with you or with Cross Timbers?
Yeah, I mean, I think with cross timbers, how we approach everything, we approach it first with that relationship. We want to get to know the tribe, and or we also work with county governments as well. But we want to get to know who you are, what you're wanting to do. But I think what makes us unique in working in the tribal transportation, program, is that we can take it from concept to closeout.
Hmm.
Me personally, I've sat in the seat of many of these people. I know how the red tape is with the federal government, how to go through the processes with my own tribe to know how to navigate those things to get a project from that concept to put into that long range transportation plan, to put it on that tribal tip, and to get it to that construction phase, and then ultimately to the closeout where, um, if it's audited, everything is good. And at the end of the day, you have a great product. You have a product that was conceived at the tribal level, and it's there to benefit the people. And so I take a lot of pride in that, because I've been there, I've done that, I've seen what it has done for my people at the Pawnee Nation. And I continue to have that pride when I work with other tribes and different organizations, that this product is going to be great. It's there for a purpose. And I'd love to see when they come to completion.
I love
Yeah.
it. What's the best way to get in contact with you or Cross Timbers? I see crosstimbersconsulting.com is
Yes.
the website. What outside of that, what would be the best way to get in contact?
So my email's on there too, and I believe my phone number, but it's chris.mccray at crosstimbersconsulting.com. And then my phone number is 90100. And then real quick, if I can just throw out a plug too, Cross Timbers, we have been putting on a training for the last 6 or 7 years for tribal transportation. And this year we're hosting it at the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, April 21st through the 23rd. It's going to be free for tribal organizations to come. We've already been in contact with about 6 or 7 federal highway employees who are coming to do some presentations and some training for us. There's a link on the Cross Timbers website for it as well. So I think so far we have about 40 people. We usually have close to 80 to 100 for this.
That's awesome.
I've emceed it every year, so I'll be back up there talking in front of everybody and stuff. But
There you go.
it's a great, fun, intimate experience where tribes, from those who are very knowledgeable to those who are just starting out, can meet the people at the federal level who dictate different grants and different ways and processes to do things. So it's a great training.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that is wonderful.
Kale and I will be in the back of the room just cheering on MC. Well, Kale, do you have anything as we wrap up? Any final questions?
I've hit Chris with everything that I can think of, and he's
Everything you
danced
got?
around it. He's danced around it beautifully. So
I love it. What is, if you could fix one thing in the construction industry in Oklahoma, whether that be architecture, engineering, or construction itself, you just, Thanos snap your fingers and it's fixed tomorrow. What would that focus be?
I'm going to look at it as an previous owner, and I'm going to say it's the red tape. It takes too long to get things done. So if there was a way to fix, either you want to say the state government, federal government, on their processes, get the funding to the tribes, and
yeah,
they'll take it and they'll run with it. They'll build it because they have the passion, they have the know-how to get it done, and great products are after that.
Quick follow-up to that. Do you see a pathway in ways or things that you're exploring on ways to do that?
I will say the processes have gotten better. Working with federal highways and then now the new USDOT self-governance, things are starting to definitely pick up in those areas on how funding gets pushed to the tribes, and then having, again, these tribes being self-determined and having that focus. You're seeing things move a little bit faster. And going back to what Kel said, what do I see in the next 10 years? I'm seeing more of that going to happen. And if that continues to happen, and especially here in Oklahoma, if you have the right state government in place, there's nothing that the tribes and the state government can't do, and the county governments and local governments can't do. It's an endless amount.
Yep. Well, that was one thing that we noted in episode 9, that with the 39 tribes here in Oklahoma, tribes and nations, excuse me, those combined GDP is greater than 50 countries in the world, just from those tribes and nations here in Oklahoma. So, I couldn't agree more. And I think we have some change on the horizon.
yeah.
I think that we have some great opportunities and potentially to see a new era of state and tribal relations, but we'll see. Fingers crossed for the best.
Yep. Time will tell. I truly, you take away those roadblocks. Tribal nations have that passion, and we've talked a lot about family, but they think outside the family too. They're
Mhm.
doing things for the entire communities. So bigger, better things to come.
I
Agreed.
love that. I think that's a great note to end on, is that we see what we see in the future. So, Chris, thank you so much
Yeah.
for being on with us. This is episode 10 of Constructive Criticism, and we really appreciate you being on here. We love having these conversations and talking about how design and construction can work better, how we can do build better relationships with all the different entities that we work with on a daily basis, whether that's tribal governments, municipalities, city and state, a county. So it's really fun to get to sit and talk with you because of your broad background. I mean, you have touched on so many different aspects of what goes into managing projects, actually building them, boots on the ground, all the way through. And so really appreciate you being on here. Again, this is episode 10 of Constructive Criticism. Zach, what's our tagline?
Where architects and contractors build better together.
There you go.
So
Awesome. Thank you.
awesome. Thank you to our listeners for joining us on episode 10. Again, I will ditto Kale. Chris, it's been a pleasure to have you on here. I definitely think that we're going to have you back in the future. There's some more, maybe a little bit more spicy topics that we want to get into specifically, but we'll take it easy for the first episode. So thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you both for having me.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kale, appreciate you, buddy. And to our listeners, thank you again. This has been episode 10. New episode every Friday on Apple, YouTube, and Spotify. And we will see you next time.